Are you there, Ellen? Can you tell me, if you are inclined, about your thoughts on after you die, from how you see things today compared to your perspective in your lifetime? I was listening to a lecture, which is probably from the 1960 or so, judging by your hairstyle. Um, can you tell me, and you were talking about the Buddhist view of it and various realms that you go through, stages. How are you with it today? Can you explain to me, Stephanie, where you got the idea that I could be here to talk to you? It came to me gradually through in my history. This is my story that Steve started talking to me and others, Tobias, and stories started developing, a whole history, a whole family connection. And so I did a lot of sessions for people where I would connect with their loved ones for them. They would just tell me the name, and I would say, "Can we speak to so and so?" And I think Steve would go get them for me. He would be my go between. So I don't know how it works. It's sort of like me getting on the internet. I have no clue how the internet works. It just works. And so I just asked for you, and you're here. Well, then, my point of view has shifted too, because your point of view shifted, didn't it? It did shift, Alan, because after Steve started coming to me after, he started talking to me, but I already had kind of, had a clue that you could talk to people who had died. I tried a few times and had minor success, but I wasn't really too engaged in it. It was more curiosity. But once Steve came to me, there was no turning back, man. That guy was explosive. He would not let go. So my point of view shifted. So now I'm seeing it from the point of view of having great conversations with wonderful people. And it's an adventure because it's always changing because like my mother has evolved in her point of view since she got to heaven. And it had a lot to do with the whole interaction that we were having. So we were having an interaction that was causing her to get a different point of view. So that's the story. Well, I have a story too. And my story is that when I died, I sighed and said, well, I guess I didn't really know what to do about talking to people about what happened when they died because I figured there wasn't much point in trying to explain something that you haven't been through. So I just kept my cool about it and told them what I gleaned from the literature that seemed to make sense to me. Okay, well, that's it in that lecture. I didn't know if you changed over the years, if you got a different point of view from it was back when you were clean cut, you were on television. Do you remember those days? Yes, very well. And I would sell a point of view that was new to the people who had been raised in the Christian religions, you see. And they took to it like ducks to water, some of them, because they were thirsty. They were very, very thirsty for a different point of view. And so, through the changes that were going on in the country, in the USA, that is, in that day, a lot of people were getting a very, very different point of view, right? Yes, I got a very different point of view through my karate training, which came as a result of the Japanese teachers who came over from, they're kind of like missionaries in a way, who came from Japan and spread out. And, they would teach people in the United States, and then those people would become proficient, and then they would teach others. Yes. So that was your introduction to Eastern philosophy, right? It was because you had no way to access it, because even in your college classes, it was just considered sort of like voodoo magic. Didn't make any sense to the Western mind because they were not the kind of people who trusted on anything but the steeple. And so they couldn't relate to the Christianity in that day because it didn't make sense to them, but they didn't have a different way to understand reality, right? Right. I didn't really get into it too much because the only thing I knew was there were certain things they would say that just made a lot of sense to me. It was my introduction to meditation, even though we would only do a very little bit of it. But I had a good instructor who just gave me a different point of view, many different ways. But it wasn't like I really was steeped in Eastern philosophy at that time. It wasn't until after I was 28 years old, a couple of years after I started karate, and I had kind of a breakthrough experience, a big, big breakthrough experience, that I became interested in reading about that stuff. Up until that time, I was more agnostic, atheistic, leading to atheism. And as I would say, the only time I used the word God was in vain. That's funny stuff. Because you can't use the word God in vain. You know that. Right, I do know that. Because the word is the word. The word is the bird that takes flight. And little light in the heavenly realms, where it will say, I'm here today, I'm here today. And then you have to play the way the bird does say, right? Right, words are powerful. Exactly. So you cannot take the word God in vain, right? Right. But you thought you could. Yeah, I was just joking anyway. I didn't really even use the word. Right. Unless I said, oh my God. Right. That was the way for most of the people I worked with. They just dropped it all. They dropped it all and they said, well, we don't know what the deal is here. We're just here. And then, of course, they began to wake up to the concept of reincarnation and of a different point of view. And the different point of view was that you had to get quiet and find the answers inside of you. You didn't need a priest to tell you what was true, right? Right. It was beginning to seep through, the Beatles, Maharishi, whatever, you know, Ram Dass, Be Here Now. That was Steve's thing. Different things were coming through. Paramahansa Yogananda, who had his group in California and then wrote his book. All of that was coming to fruition in the 60s. Right. And so many people came to know a lot about Buddhism and about the philosophy of Zen. So you studied the philosophy of Zen, right? I don't know if you could say I studied the philosophy of Zen. I read some books that had Zen in the title but it was after I had my experience. And I was like, wow, things are very different than I thought they were. Whoa. So you were not looking for the answers, were you? Or were you? Well, I was looking for answers, but not in a formalistic way. I was just looking for answers. So I was just, I don't know, but I wasn't engaged in any, I didn't like self-help books and things like that. I thought they were kind of stupid. It's like somebody else going to tell you to help yourself. You should just help yourself. Right? You should just help yourself. Well, anyway, there came the day when you figured it out, right? Or it figured you out. Yeah, it figured me out. And so from that day forward, you did say, hey, there's a different way to view reality, right? Very different way to view reality. And so you could never go backwards, right? You could never go back to the girl or woman who you were before you got figured out, right? Right. And now you're still figuring it out, right? Right. I am still figuring it out. It's kind of fun. Um, I don't want to give up trying to figure it out because that wouldn't be any fun, or would it? Would it be fun to give up trying to figure it out? I don't think so, but others might because they just light in the world they see and ruffle their feathers and say, I'm here today to play. And they play in whatever way suits them, you see. And they don't try to figure out the big picture. They just continue to play in the way that makes sense to them, right? Right. I would say that about most people I run into. They're really not interested in putting together the big picture. They're just interested in creating a little portfolio of pictures that works for them, I guess. Maybe we all are. I don't know. No, I think you're right. They just want to get a few things figured out, and then they think they've got it good, and they don't have to do anything for the rest of their lives because they got it all figured out, right? That's right. So what were you going to say, Steph? Why don't you just say it out loud? Well, I was thinking, Alan, about when I was getting ready to create a school, I had to spend a lot of time thinking about, the philosophy of education and people and stuff. And maybe I knew this before, but anyway, the best I can articulate it, I had many ideas in those days about ways to try to reach people, but you had to reach them at a very simple level, but it is simple at the heart anyway. And what I came to see was that people have cognitive leaps. That's what I'm going to call them. When they suddenly go, Eureka, I get it, and the classic example is the law of conservation of energy, where you realize that if you have liquid in a short fat glass and you pour it in a tall thin glass, it doesn't mean you have more liquid in that glass, second glass. You have the same amount. So the energy from one to the next remains the same, but it looks different. It looks different. It takes on a different shape. So energy can take on a different shape, but still be the equivalent in terms of its totality of its evidence, energy. And I don't know, when we're talking atoms and stuff like that, I don't know how it works. I don't know if ultimately, you have so much energy it can spread out, the atoms can be further apart, and it's still equivalent to what it started out as, but it's more compacted. You compact energy. I guess you can, pistons and things. Right. You can still have the amount of energy, but you can compress it, or you can set it free and let it blow away, you see, into a different point of view. And so you got a different point of view, but you didn't finish telling me what you were going to tell me about the cognitive leaps. Oh, right. So what I saw was that I remember the day that I understood perspective, at least, that the I have a different view on it now, a different point of view, but at the time, the idea, the eureka of, oh, cars look small when they're far away because it all has to do with distance, and as they come closer to you, they get bigger because they're getting nearer to you. I remember the day that I just was sitting in the car and it just went, eureka, I get it, you know. And so I don't know how old I was. I probably was fairly old, 7 years old or something, before I really, that was really a principle that I understood. And then I began to see that I continued to have cognitive leaps, as you would call them. I still have them. But most of the people I know had stopped having cognitive leaps by the time that they were, I don't know, 13 years old, maybe sooner, 11 years old. And it was, they just couldn't look at the world and perceive the new principles in it. So I guess a good idea of a example of a cognitive leap would be Einstein writing his light beam, and seeing how things fit together. So I just thought that it had a lot to do with our educational system, that we were just trained to regurgitate what people told us. We didn't have access to the hands-on experience that gives rise to cognitive leaps. So I continued to have lots of cognitive leaps well into adulthood, 40s, 50s, 60s, and I still have them. I don't know where they come from or how they happen, but sometimes I think people feed me the concepts. But I don't see that happening for most people around me in my world. Me neither, because that is a aspect of the ability to flex your muscles in your energetic body and find out how things fit together, right? So you like to figure out how things fit together. I do. I do. I went through a period where I was getting lots of these cognitive leaps, and I'd think of a problem and it would just be on my mind. And then all of a sudden I'd get a eureka. You just got to look at it from a different point of view. Like, to me, a cognitive leap for me, which may or may not be empirically true, I don't know, is that matter is actually like the hurricane. The particle of matter is actually empty space. It's just the eye of the hurricane. It's the energy moving around it, you might say, that makes it look like it is stable, like it is a thing, when it's really nothing. Does that make sense to you? I don't know if it does, but it's just something that occurred to me, and I still think it works, as part of the big picture. Really, I didn't think of that, Steph. So you're saying that what people think of as the building blocks of matter, you might say, or the lowest common denominator, is nothing at all, but it is the energy that flows around it that causes people to see the hole in the middle of the hurricane, right? Right. That's very interesting. I never thought of it that way. So what is moving then from your perspective? What's the energy? It's the tension. It's the tension that is created through the initial splitting of God energy into its duality. Interesting. So it's like there's two poles, and the energy flows around the poles, like a fan belt, like a Mobius strip with two sides. So there's options. So like female, male would have two poles, two polarities, but there would be a flow of energy that would go around these two poles. But the poles themselves are not really a thing. It's the energy is having to follow this pattern in order to maintain the equilibrium of the duality, if you will, or the reality of the duality. The duality can't exist, neither side of it can exist without the other, right? I think you said that in one of your lectures I was just listening to, but in a different way. You said that karma was kind of like, if you pick up a brush or a comb, one end of the comb, when you pick it up, the other end's going to come with it because they're connected. They can't be separated. It's like we would say a coin. If I hand you a coin, you're going to get both sides of it. You can't get just one side of the coin. Right. Well, that's a pretty powerful insight. And I might have to swipe that idea from you and run it through the mill of my own observations and see what comes to me. Because you're right. It makes sense to me. And if it makes sense, then maybe it's sensible to look at it from that point of view. So good for you. I never thought of it that way. And I have thought of a lot of things, you might say. A lot of nothings, I guess, you might say. Right. And that, was another cognitive leap for me was that zero, which is the symbol of everything, of course, the zero circle is the potential. It contains everything within it. So it's no thing, but it has the potential of everything. I use the word inchoate. I don't know if it's an appropriate use to that word, but I guess it's because my legal training inchoate, you know, experience or things. And so the algebraic equation is the unfolding and folding back of that fan from zero. So zero is the fulcrum, you might say, of the dualities. So, like God says, there has to be a trinity, me, you, and reality, because the duality has to be held together. If love divides into the love, I've talked about this before. I don't know if you've heard this, but if love divides into the lover and the beloved, they have to be held together by their essential nature, which is love, which is what they come from. Questioning my own ability to keep up with you, dear, because I hear some things that are ringing very loud and clear. So you started out asking me about my point of view on the things that I said when I was a man on earth, you see. So let me think about that a minute because I have a new point of view and it's continually being reshaped when I talk to you. So let's see. If you and I are able to talk today, that tells me I didn't go away. I'm still here. You're still here. We're still pretty clear in their ability to discuss reality. So, seems like I didn't die after all, did I? Now it seems like that Alan when I had my experience when I was 28, I did see I it was like I got a download, and part of the download was about reincarnation. It just goes on and on and on. To me, it was just like watching all these carts going off into the distance, at following each other. So who knows what's in the carts, what they're carrying? I guess a lifetime. But I didn't know if what I didn't know was if there was a preservation of personality. In other words, a continuity of personality. I didn't know if when you died, that was the end of your particular personality, because it's just like saying all deer. The deer are no respecter of boundaries. They'll run over the boundary between North Dakota and South Dakota without a concern. They don't have maps and say, oh, I've come to the boundary. And so they're just wild and free. And so people are kind of like that too. But the only thing that, as I was seeing it, the only thing that could identify people was the memories of other people, the ideas. In other words, if the deer were to name themselves and say, hey, I'm Joe and you're John and this is Mary. And Mary is kind of scary because she's had some bad experiences, and John is pretty mellow because he's had an easy life and da 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 da. Then you identify each of these deer has an identity, but it only exists within the sort of artificial reality of human intercourse, if that makes sense. It's like a natural world, and then there's an overlay of human ideas, words, talk, uh, things like that. How it fits together, I guess. Otherwise, if you're just experiencing life raw, it's just raw. It's just when you see somebody, it's just a smell, a sight, a feeling, an interaction, and it's broken down into momentary experiences, I guess you could say. But the memory of it put into words, if you don't put it into words, you can't hold on to it, is what I came to see. So when you put it into words, you create this whole world made of words that overlays the essential natural world. That's what I saw. But I didn't see the continuity of personality. I did not see it. I just didn't know if it could exist without the people who remember you, if that makes sense. If it was a real thing or if not. So I was pretty surprised when Steve came to me. I was pretty surprised, very surprised, very, very surprised that there could be a continuity of personality. Nothing could ever be more intriguing than the investigation of reality through the natural world on Earth or elsewhere, I suppose, because it contains all the answers to the questions, right? I would say so, yes. It contains all the answers to the questions that you could have. Well, yeah, just contains the answers. I mean, I'm saying that, so I haven't really tested it, but I'm going with it. So if you have a question and you look to the natural world, you'll find an answer, right? Right. I mean, that's how people came up with all the mathematical formulas and the patterns was from looking to the natural world, right? Exactly. Because the answers are all embedded in the world you see. And all you have to do is pay attention. And then you'll find what you're looking for. right? Do you find what you're looking for, Stephanie, in the natural world? I have to think about that a minute because I don't want to just say something without really thinking about it. I guess I do. I mean, the natural world to me is what I see, feel, smell, all that kind of stuff. So I guess so. I don't know. I don't know, Alan. I'd have to think about that a lot. Look at different circumstances and issues. Because I get a lot of love from a feeling of it, from interacting with people in heaven. And it's a good warm feeling. So I get a warm feeling, a very happy feeling. So is that the natural world? Right? A bit of information there to ponder. So you say you get a lot of love from above, right? Like saying you can talk to me or others here, and you feel very at home. You feel happy to have someone to talk to that can keep up with you, right? It's true. I do like having people who can keep up with me. So is that a finger puppet? No, I don't think so. Because we have two finger puppets talking to each other. Then which one's the finger puppet? Right. So we're all just finger puppets on the hand of God, I guess. There's a good illusion. I like that one. Okay. So we're all finger puppets on the hand of God. And when we talk to each other, we say, how are you today? What do you got on your mind? And then we talk about it and we feel good because we talk about it, right? I do. And you also feel good when you're with Steve, right? I do sometimes. But we can get a very good vibe going and it feels pretty cool. That is interesting to me because I wouldn't have thought that was possible, that there could be so much connection with someone who was just like me, hanging around in spirit, you see? So are you a finger puppet? Yeah, I am if you are. Okay, it would be finger puppets. So you're just hanging around, and I'm still trying to figure that out because, the only way I can interpret anything is in a physical sense, other than not necessarily physically, because like I can lay there and if I have an ache or a feeling in my body, and I can just get into the feeling itself, and it doesn't necessarily have to have a location in the body. It's just when I think that it has a location in the body, I associate it with location in the body, then it begins to be identified in a physical way. Otherwise, it's just a experience. Because if you have an ache or a feeling, what, where are you feeling it? You know, dead meat is you can't feel, can it? But it's the same body. That is another good question. And I think you and I could have some very good discussions about all this. So let's get back to my changed point of view. I guess my point of view has changed since I left my life on earth and got unchained. I got unchained from the karmic round, you see, because I came to see that the karmic round wasn't really as inevitable as I thought. because it is fraught with misinformation. So if I thought and I taught that the nature of karma is that it's really sort of like cause and effect, but not really. It's just what you would call duality, right? That if this moves, that moves, etc. Because of that polarity you were talking about, and the energy that flows around the two poles. So there's going to be a consistent reaction that will be felt throughout the whole system, right? Yes. So therefore, the system works as a whole, and it can unload its energy in a different way if it has the capacity to flow through all the finger puppets, you see. But if some of the finger puppets are closing off their energy, so it can't be possible for the energy to function spontaneity with spontaneity in whatever way makes sense today, then there will be a reverberation. It's like saying that you beat on a door and nobody opens the door, but the sound of your beating can be heard inside, and they can't ignore it. They can't ignore it. And so when the energy can't go where it wants to go, it's going to beat on your door. And that is how I see it today. Okay, that kind of makes sense to me too. That, you know, so we could take the example of, well, do you have an example of what that would look like from the earth? Yes, I do. And I'm thinking of the same one you're thinking of, but we're not going to talk about that, right? No. Okay, so let's go to a different example. If I say to you, Stephanie, uh, that you deserve to play in a certain way only if you pay your way, then I'm setting you up for failure, aren't I? Because you have to pay the price to play that way. And that means that someone's gonna have to take your ticket, which they sold to you for a pretty penny, in order to give you the right to play in a certain way. So it's like the doorman collects the fee and then he lets you through the door, you see? So if you say to somebody, this is the way I have to play, this is the way it works, you see, I play the doorman, and then I get to go in to the building and play the way I want to play. Then you have set up a system of pay as you go that will become your cage, you see. You can't escape this pattern. Whereas if you did say, well, I don't know how it's going to go. I think I'll go here and see if I can play this way. And someone says, well, you got to pay. You want to play this way. And you say, how come? Because they say it's the pattern. It's the pattern that is established here. And so if you say, well, if you're going to eat meat on Friday, you're going to go to hell, then that's the pattern. And if you eat meat on Friday, you might have to pay the price in a hellish way. which doesn't have to mean that you go to some place called hell in the nature of Dante's Inferno. You could just have a bad day because you have to balance out the energy, you see? Because that's your pattern that you have demanded of reality. You said, I got to play this way. So if the energy comes knocking at your door and says, hey, come on out and play, you say, I can't come out and play unless I pay. Got to pay the price, you see, and I don't want to pay the price, so I'm not going to come out and play. And energy says, then I'm going to beat down your door. Because if that's the way you want to play, then I'll have to make you pay. Come out and play. And so I'm going to beat on your door. And you're going to hate it, you see, because you don't want to come out and play, because you don't want to pay the price. But the price is that I'm beating on your door. That's the price you pay because you set it up that way. But you didn't know that you were doing it. So karma has a lot to do with ignorance. It has a lot to do with just saying that I can get away with this. I can get away with this. I don't have to pay the price that I tell others they have to pay. Tell others they have to pay the doorman, and then I try to sneak in the door and play without paying the price. But because I set up the pattern myself for others, I'm going to have to be the one that will play in the way I did say. Right. That makes sense to me, especially in light of the example we're both thinking of. Right. So he set up a certain pattern, and then he has to play according to the pattern. He doesn't get to escape from it, you see. If his number comes up, his number comes up. Because that's the price for the freedom that he wants. He wanted that freedom, and so he has to pay the price. And other people may not want that freedom. They say, well, I don't care because it's not important to me. And so I don't see any reason why anyone has to pay the price for something that's not important and that others don't want to do. So I'm not trusting on that pattern. I'm just paying attention to how others play because others are teachers, you see. They show us what patterns that they trust upon and how they come back and bite them, you see. So it comes back and bites you in the ass and you say, ouch, that hurt. So it is a kind of cause and effect thing. It is kind of a double-edged sword. So that if you take the sword, the top edge of the sword, you got to have the bottom edge. And like you say, if you take the coin, you got to have both sides because the patterns that you create are the patterns that are created for you. So you just create the bars of your own cage, you see. But it happens so seamlessly that most people aren't even aware of it. They're just not aware of it. Right, Alan. I always think it's funny when people say, well, karma's going to get you for what you did to me. And I always think, well, it sounds like karma got you. That's true, Steph. That's very true. They want to escape from the price of their own karma by heaping it on others, you see. Yeah, we call that making others the cause of your suffering. Right. And you're the cause of your own suffering. So I get that. So back to the question. Do I have a different point of view than I had when I was on Earth? I certainly do. And my point of view is this. I still have life. I still have a life that I live here. Wherever I am here. And when my life is done, I guess I'll be the one that never had a life at all, right? Right. That's to me what is kind of, boy, we're getting really philosophical here. gleaning all my secrets, but that really strikes me because it's true that, if you died and you disappeared, you never had a life. Where did you have it? You know, if something blinks out of existence, it never existed. How could it? I mean, there is the idea that you blink in and out of existence. Um, but if you disappear eternally in exchange for 80 years or whatever, there's no balance to that. No, there isn't. And there would be nothing to remind you because you wouldn't even have a mind that would be capable of being reminded. You couldn't be anything at all. You never existed in reality. You didn't even exist in a dream, you see. Right. Impossible. And yet, that simple example cannot be comprehended by so many people, even ones with multiple degrees from fancy universities cannot understand such a simple concept. So, why do you think that is, Stephanie? Well, I don't know. As one of the finger puppets, I'm thinking that some of the finger puppets, um, I don't know, put a sack over their head. I don't know. What do you think it is? Well, that's the question, isn't it? Why are you and I in this world together? Why are we talking today? Why? We live in a world, you and I, where we see eye to eye, and yet there are so many who can't look us in the eye and smile and say, "Hey, I see you today." They have to run away because they're afraid that we might spoil their game, you see. So their game is to hide from themselves. Yes. So it's God hiding from God. Yes. So fingertip puppets are on the hand of God. I kind of am liking that illusion. I hadn't thought of it that way really, but I just came up with the idea of finger puppets because people who don't trust that I could talk to Steve or whatever, I'm like, well, if you just think it's a finger puppet, what's the difference? Just listen to the finger puppet. So all the finger puppets are puppeteering because they all feel the breeze in their hair, right? And it spins them around and they say, "Hey, who blew my hair today?" Because they can't remember that they are the ones who created the patterns of reality, right? Right. So we talked about karma and creating the patterns of your own experience. So you have to pay for the price that you set for your experience. So question why people do that, I tend to trust on the ancient idea that you can divide the world into good and evil, and there's something called evil, whereas to me it's just the backwards point of view. But the absence of good, which is nothing, which can't escape it. But there is, so your idea about it. So you and I, with our finger puppets, we're creating a pattern in the way we discuss it, right? That then the word becomes the bird that flies away to heaven and it takes its place in the mechanism of creation, and the world spins that way, right? Might not know how to respond to that because I'm not sure. I'm the bird, or the finger puppet, or the breeze in the trees. Remember the story. You know it, don't you? Yeah, I heard you say it today, Steve. I mean, Steve, calling you Steve. Alan, you said, I don't remember the whole story, but the man who wasn't sure if he was a man dreaming he was a butterfly or a butterfly dreaming he was a man. But it doesn't really matter, does it? No, it doesn't matter. It's just the flip of point of view to loosen up the screws a bit so you don't screw yourself so bad. Right. So me either, I don't know whether I'm the finger puppet or the breeze in the trees or the, I don't know. And I guess I don't have to know. Which brings me to another part of my philosophy. Do you want to hear it? Of course. That the answer is there is no answer. That eventually, when you start trying to figure things out, you run out of rope and then you just kind of drop into the abyss with a kiss, I guess. I like the kiss part. So the abyss will be the black hole that spits you out again, right? Yes, it spits you out. You can't stay there because that's the pattern of the essential nature of the duality of the world you see, you and the world, right? Right. And so when the lights go out, you say, well, the lights went out today, and the world will say, well, come this way, honey, and I'll light up your light for you. And you say, okay, and away you go. And you get another day, and you see it a different way, right? Right. Black hole spews you out into the light, into a new world. And so you run out of rope. Periodically, you fall into the abyss or the black hole, and you get pushed out into the light, right? Right. So that's a pattern too, right? Yes, it is a pattern too. It works for you. It works for me perfectly because of the symmetry. Yeah, and it's like the answer is there is no answer. There's perfect symmetry. That self-sustaining, like the eternal fire, you know? Yes, it encapsulates itself. So yes, the answer to your prayer, Steph, is always going to be the way we wear our hair, because the prayer itself is a choice, isn't it? Yes, it is. And where does that choice come from? I have no clue. I think it just spews from the whatever it is that there is no answer to, like the black hole that just keeps spewing out the light. Somebody talked to said it was like a, what do you call that word, a torus or something? That, I always like the idea of the wine bottle, but the torus that just keeps feeding back into itself like a donut ball. So love from above will always manifest in a donut, you see? So I think we should get together in our next life on Earth and go out for donuts. And when I look at the whole, I'll say, well, Steph told me that is the essence of physical reality, is the hole in the donut. But all the good stuff's in the donut, right? That's right. It's the energy moving around the hole that has all the stuff that feeds you. I like that illusion too. So, are you ready to hit the hay? I am. Should I send Steve? Don't say that. Why not? Because sometimes I think that I should share these recordings with people so they get a different point of view too, even if they don't really care. But I don't want it to get too personal. Why not? Because the answer is there is no answer. Or as the kids would say, because, just because, right? Because of your own experience, you see, be the cause of the consequences that come to you. Because the consequences that come to you will always spew forth from the energy that you spew forth into the world you see. Yes. And so, to answer my question, you do have a different point of view because your point of view is that you're here, and I assume you have memories of your experiences in heaven, right? Yes, I do. And so you have a continuity of personality, right? Yes, I do. And you can talk to others in heaven, right, if you want to, but how do you know if they're others or if they're just uh, the mirrors in the funhouse? They just look different than you because the mirrors are funny. I don't, but I don't care because why would I care if I can stare at you or someone and say, hey, friend, can we transcend our differences enough to share our points of view? And that is what friendship is about for me, is to be able to share what I think with someone who shares what they think. And then we think together, you see, because it's thinking. Thinking is happening. And it doesn't matter where it's coming from because it will just spew forth and spew out a new point of view. Right. I like that. Thinking is happening. Okay, Alan, thank you very much. And bye bye. Bye, dear.